Thanks everyone for joining us. First meeting 2021. And so we potentially have a packed agenda depending on when our guests show up. I mean, chances are we'll stretch a little bit until the first one, Cape Victor, arrives, and then our former chair, he was currently the executive director for MPO, Tegan, will be here, and we'll end the meeting with that. So we're just going to front load. Well, we're going to take care of a lot of the things that we usually discuss at the end of the meeting at this point and until Kate shows up. And of course, we'll talk about, excuse me, the, chapters 3 and 4 of the needs assessment from the last LRTP. So we'll quickly go around, do some introductions. Let me see if I can get a grid view here. Actually, what I'll do is I'll get the participants view and just go down the list in alphabetical order. So, and I'm Len, and I am representing the Rider Oversight Committee on the council. And next, we have Marilyn.
Yeah, Marilyn Wellens, Riverside Neighborhood Association, Cambridge. Can you hear me?
Yes, just
good.
fine. Good. Thank you, Marilyn. Next, Scott.
Hi, Scott Zadakis. I'm the co-chair of RTAC, and I work on the National Rural Transit Assistance Program.
Thanks, Scott. And John McQueen.
John McQueen, Walk Boston.
Great. Thanks, John. And John Seward.
John Seward, Move Mass.
Thank you, John. And Laura Weiner.
Laura Weiner, Watertown Planning Department.
Thanks, Laura. And Todd Curran. Did I say that last name right, Todd?
You did. You did. Todd Curran, Transportation Administrator for the town of Brookline.
Thank you, Todd. And Anna Christina.
Sorry, Anna Christina, Boston Society of Civil Engineers.
Thank you, Anna. And Franny Osmond.
Franny Osmond, town of Acton.
Thank you. Thank you, Franny. And Andy.
Andy Reeker, City of Cambridge. I'm a transit planner in the Community Development Department.
Thanks, Andy. David Montgomery.
David Montgomery, Town of Needham.
Thanks, David. Joe Blankenship.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Joe Blankenship. I'm a transportation planner with the Boston Planning and Development Agency.
Great, thanks, Joe. And did I get everyone? Go ahead. Someone
Can
want
I
to say
ask what the Boston Planning and Development Agency is? Are you under another? Like, I'm so used to the planner. I'm used to the MAPC, and I'm used to maybe the Boston Planning Department.
So I think you're. A lot of people call our agency the Boston Planning Department. We are the planning agency for the city of Boston. So you're spot on with that.
All right.
Well, formerly known as the Boston Redevelopment.
Formerly the BRA. Yep.
Well, thanks, folks. For inquiring more. Now I have a better sense of who Joe is and what he does. So it's great. So we have minutes to approve, and from 3 dates, looks like the 13th, the 11th, and the 8th. So November 13th, 2019, December 11th, 2019, and January 8th, 2020.
I'm sorry, Len. Just before that, do you have a chair's report?
Well, I know I'm taking things a little bit out of sequence. I was gonna do that next. Maybe.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I appreciate you reminding me of that because I could easily blow through something like that. And you know what? Since we did it in sequence, and I want to keep you prepared to make sure I'm not missing anything. Let's just stay in sequence. So, chair's report. We had a short MPO meeting on the 7th, and like a little more than an hour, which is kind of unusual for us. And there was one thing that was, I thought, very interesting was a research report from CTPS by Emily Can you give me your last name? Demonico. Yeah. It was a really good study about how they're testing whether or not you could use census data to get a sense of transit riders. And it was interesting because it was one of those like negative results kind of studies. And so on the surface, you might think, well, the answer came back not particularly useful, but that I think was important information. And the way they went about the study, I thought was very interesting. And this was one of those cases where it was a project that was suggested for UPWP in a somewhat different form, and we decided not to go forward with it. But staff, I thought, it felt that it was worth, elements of it was worth pursuing, and so they made it a staff project. And as I mentioned at the MPO, I really like these staff-related projects because they first off, we allow the staff to do what they feel is really interesting, which I think is good for motivation. But often you get interesting things out of them, and to repeat, negative results can be very interesting, but it sometimes isn't the kind of study that you want to do as a full-fledged UPWP study. At that point, you really want to test a hypothesis that isn't likely to give you a negative result. You really want some additional information about how maybe you should move forward on given types of projects. So that was a highlight from that meeting. So that will be the chair's report. And if there are any questions about that, if you could raise your hand through the interface, because I'm just kind of looking at the participants list. I don't have a great view of everybody. That's Andy.
So Len, I didn't have a chance, just given kind of the end of the year and then the beginning of the new year, and how wild it's been, to be honest. To really take a look at what's presented at the MPO board. When you said the staff generated research project had a negative result, I just wanted to get an explanation of what you meant by negative result.
Well, so by negative result, I meant that the hypothesis was that, let's just say the hypothesis was that we could use census data to give us some insights into transit usage. The result was that it couldn't, and so that's what I meant by negative result. Is that clear?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's still informative.
Yep.
So I shouldn't say it that way. So negative, it's kind of, I guess, unnecessarily pejorative. It's just kind of it's sort of like when you get a no on your hypothesis, you really consider that a negative result. And so that's it.
Yeah, it's the H0 instead of the H1. Like, your hypothesis, it's not the one that you wanted, but that it's still useful to know that that's not a direction you could pursue, I guess. So that's super useful information, I think.
Yeah. So I just really want to encourage them to do more like that. And if you look at the report itself, Emily created a really good app, though. That shows a lot of good information related to each of the well, not each, but I guess a lot of the bus routes. And she did another app for the DBDI. One of the most recent DB disproportionate benefits, disparate impact analysis, and so she's just really good at what she does. And so if you want a good graphical interface, with a lot of data, she's good at doing it. I'm happy that she's working with the MPO at TTPS. So any other questions?
Yeah, Len, I'm having trouble following what exactly you're talking about. Can you put a link to the report that you're talking about in the chat, maybe?
I was actually working on doing that very thing as we speak. So you'll have one in just a moment, Franny.
That was great. And I also want to note that while you were talking, and maybe that's why I wasn't following you very well, I was trying to look for the minutes. And so I went to the calendar and I still don't see the minutes in the calendar. So I'm a little confused how to see them.
Sorry, I just need to get over to the calendar. I think I We're having some slight technical difficulties with the back end of our website, and
Okay.
I may have completely messed up
Okay.
in posting them.
As long
That's
as it's
fine.
not me, I don't care.
It's fine. Then we can,
It's more personal frustration, but
okay.
here,
We'll have,
let me get you that link regardless, Franny.
well, we can put this off for until the next meeting, in which case we'll have at least, hopefully we'll have at least 3 minutes to approve, and maybe 4 more. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know,
I appreciate it. Sorry, folks.
Yeah,
I've been just having a day.
that's okay. That's fine. That's fine. I mean, at this point, it's more so for the record, I mean, than it is for any reference, I mean, any quick reference to what happened in a recent meeting. So
We're
fine.
not going to lose sleep over it. David's
No.
hand is up.
Yes, Mr. Nemery?
Yeah, could I just make a request with respect to the minutes? I think it would be helpful for me, greatly helpful, if instead of posting it as sort of a optimistic phrasing of these will be posted before the meeting calendar, I would encourage that we only mention them if they're already ready to go in the agenda. So if by the time you're circulating the agenda, you're ready to post, great. And if you're not, don't mention them, because it kind of gets my hopes up each week or each month. And then I find it a little frustrating to have it not ready. And I understand we're having technical difficulties, that's fine. But I just encourage that we not sort of set our expectations higher than we're ready to deliver.
I 100% agree with you, David. And in this case, it was just my own error because they were ready to go. But that being said, 100% agreed. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, and if they are, then chances are I'll pull them down. I mean, earlier too. So okay, so well that takes care of that part of the agenda. And let me just check the time here. All right, and so old business, new business, member announcements. We'll take that now, just because I said we'll probably run out the clock with taking at the end. And if new people join, then we might do a quick revisit at the very end, but devote some time to that right now. And Christina?
Just some good news. I was on a call with Stephen Lynch, our rep, and the incoming administration looks like they're really gung-ho for infrastructure investment. And on top of that, I explained to him about sustainability and resiliency. At first, he was a little reluctant. And I told him this does not require an overhaul of code. There's a lot of stuff we can be doing now. And he wants to put together a forum. So I'll keep you updated and maybe pull some of you in that are interested in that subject. That's it. Thanks.
Sure. I'm just curious, what was his reluctance about the sustainability? Did you get a sense of that?
Yes, apparently he's actually an engineer like I am, but he's more of a structural, and he was in an ironworker union. And again, it comes down to code. This is a big issue in general in our field, is codes, because all these wonderful new materials, they require testing and usage, before they make it to code and you can officially use them. And I'm telling him there's stuff we can be doing that brings in equity into an area, environmentally friendly, makes it resilient, that does not involve changing resource materials at their base. That's it.
All right,
As long as
Andy.
things meet code, but they got to be tested and proven, It takes time. That'll take 30 years.
All right. Thanks, Anna. So we have John McQueen.
Yes. To that point, Anna Maria, perhaps someone at CTPS or whatever could put together a list of shovel-ready projects in that infrastructure category and then flag them with their degree of sustainability, to her point, just to give the members of Congress, or at least our delegation, some guidance as to what they should steer toward, or what they could steer money toward.
Yeah, I think in the start, it sounds like first we're going to put together a forum, of which I'm an Envision specialist. So I'm going to look for people like with LEAD and Envision and get them to come and get the forum together and going. And then a good thing would be, especially when it comes time to have hearings somewhere before July, it'll be good to have those shovel-ready projects, to know what they are and maybe appeal to them to come speak at the hearing. Does
Okay.
that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, I think John agrees. So he happens to be at the top of my little column here. So I think that's it. For new business from members. So our announcements. So all right, we'll move on. I'm hesitating a little bit because, yeah, I'll wait. Okay, we'll move on to discussion about the needs assessment, chapters 3 and 4. And so if anyone has anything they want to say about those 2 chapters, or any questions they have about anything that they read, now's the time. Otherwise, what I'll do is discuss some things that I noted I noted a whole lot of things. We'll just pick out some of them and discuss them and maybe generate some questions, interactions. So John McQueen.
Thanks. Overall, it just seems as though that area that's designated as the business district and the core area really may not be reflecting what the true business district sphere of influence is or will be in 2040 or even now. And perhaps Fenway, Kendall Square, and potentially the Alston area later. But by 2040, that enterprise research area will be fully developed and possibly to the scale of Kendall Square. So I think that's with the LMA in the Fenway, Kendall Square, and possibly Alston, that might really reflect where a truer density and business district would be in terms of commuters to and from and business influence.
Well, that's a very interesting comment. And because I read that chapter more as the current system. I wasn't really thinking when I read it, how what it would look like in 20 years from now. And that is the whole point, though, of the LRTP. And I'm really trying to think now, whether subsequent chapters really touch on what the future is going to look like. And my recollection is that that's not the case. So
Well,
go ahead.
Also, I think even for the current time, it doesn't really reflect the true magnitude of influence of Kendall Square and the LMA and that whole Fenway district, which is currently in that business district. I think that would be more appropriate.
I see. So what do you mean, though, that it doesn't account for its influence?
Well, I mean, the Kendall Square area accounts for an enormous amount of gross product, business product, as well as the LMA with its hospitals and educational assets and scientific assets. I mean, it's a huge drive. Both of them are huge drivers currently of employment and monetary value to Massachusetts.
All right, I got it. I have a response to that, but I see Anna Christina has her hand up. So Anna.
I just wanted to make a quick point as far as what John brought up. As a post-resident of both the Fenway and then East Cambridge, those areas are suffering from community disbursement from what they were traditionally because of gentrification. So I think, yes, they're great employment sectors, but it's breaking up communities big time, which is a little sad. The second thing is, like, there's people on gateway cities at the end of, rail, the commuter rail systems that I think are also kind of coming into being big employers. And I can't see why that can't be an argument to invest in better transit and go to electrification and have the more trips included in gateway cities and kind of so there's not so much congestion in one little hub. That's it. Just a point. Thanks.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, thanks, me. So before I well, yeah, I'll call Andy, and then I'll maybe say something. Andy.
Yeah, no, I think just adding to the chorus, I think, even some. So the way I read the LRTP, and maybe this is a clarification I need, but I feel like there's a central area kind of outline, and then there's really the Boston Business District. And I think there is a worthwhile focus on some of the developing employment centers within the central area. So Kendall Square would fall into that. I think also LMA, but even Watertown is kind of facing a lot of development pressures from some lab developments, and also parts of Somerville as well too. And I think Laura's probably able to speak to Watertown much more, but I believe that there's also some kind of outside of the Boston typical central financial district or Back Bay area, or even the Seaport, there's smaller, although maybe not not as intensely developed, but there is development pressure in those areas that may not be addressed in a way that I think makes sense, given the pressure that's there today. I think John is right that we should expect that there continues to be development pressure in those locations, regardless of what happens in the immediate, like maybe 9 to 12 months, but in the long-term kind of planning, as this document is really trying to do.
Gotcha. So I think John may have his hand up again, but so before John speaks again, I'll respond. Pretty much to what John had said. And so when I was reading chapter 3, it was really talking about in the BBD and the central area, and then the outer part of the MPO. It was talking about how traffic moves amongst those areas. So cars, transit, and non-vehicle. And so I would say maybe the amount of business activity may or may not be correlated to that. It may be density in other areas. It may be other factors that are contributing to the amount of traffic and the types of modes that are used. So I was looking at it from that perspective, and so I don't. It is what it is. I don't know how we can say it's not reflective of what's going on unless you are saying that their data is not right. Is that what you're saying, John?
No, I'm just saying that it's not reflective of really current times and the movement to future, but even current times, because the LMA, for instance, and Fenway are contiguous really to those areas. They're just arbitrarily shut out, but they're huge business. If they're calling it a business district, then rely on the magnitude of business that's being done and contributed, and really aside from the Charles River, Kendall Square is really contiguous too, at least. So I don't think it reflects, but what also I think it does is if, for instance, you put those areas into the business district category or measurement, how would that change the travel patterns and travel demands and usage of the central district. It would probably change it enormously.
Oh, I see your
Okay.
point. I see your point. Okay. All right. I just misunderstood what you were getting at. I see what you're getting at. Yeah. Okay. So reflective is definitional, and I was just not interpreting that word the same way. My fault. Okay. Well, I mean, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I'm trying to think of whether you can capture that in some way, or whether it does distort how you interpret, or whether it distorts the conclusions that you make because of the way that you have divided up in the area. All right. Well, thanks, John. And anyone else want to say anything else? Yeah. So,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I won't put my hand up. Hold on, we get out of that. One other thing, and it was getting into the suburban mode shares. I was looking at the mode shares for transit, and it would really help because they refer earlier on to the impact of the RTAs and the public or the private shuttles and things like that. It would help in the suburban if they really specifically broke out the RTA's impact and usage, because it would help assess really the true value of the RTAs currently and where they anticipate they're really going to be able to go or need in 2040. Because right now it's almost a tough sell for the RTAs.
All right. I hear that. And and I think, even though this is, we're looking back at the last LRTP, what we really want to do is point out, what we think, could make it better, as we do the needs assessments for the current LRTP. So, not only is part of this exercise to get us like more, have a deeper understanding, of the needs of the area, and the material that was presented, but also, communicate, to the CTS and NPO, what we think should be factored in to the next RTP. And so we have AC now.
Sorry.
No problem.
Another just a quick point to John's point. Like I said, living between the LMA when I was in Fenway, and then I think Uville Hospital was right up the street when I was in Cambridge. But that's not always the best idea for business center, because there's like ambulances and stuff, and they cannot afford to get stuck in traffic. And that was always a big issue, especially during a baseball game. So there's a lot of businesses developing around those areas, but that's why I'm saying like we should push out and not be so congested because of those existing industries. They do have needs, transportation needs that are, I don't know if you'd, what's the word, essential, but can anyone speak to that? I mean, I'm just talking off my ear here.
Andy?
So I wish I could speak to more of the essential stuff. I think the other thing that, maybe on a different track that I was curious about that I don't feel like is going to be reflected here in the current document, but I would hope in a future document would be, in Cambridge, when we did our citywide planning, when it came to transportation issues, more focused on mobility. And really one of the main questions that at least folks in our municipality were really saying is that they wanted to make sure that, sustainable options were available to as many people in our community as possible. So spread around geographically. So we essentially went up and kind of went census block by census block and figured out, do people in this census block have access to blue bike stations? Do they have access to safe and comfortable bicycle infrastructure? Do they have access to, sufficient number of pedestrian kind of improvements that, really focus on safety? Now we're adding, in the city through some of the work that I've been doing, and then, Tegan really started when she was working for the city of Cambridge of, transit priority infrastructure and these kind of items. So, it doesn't come up to a lot of things, but, as we think about, the needs of what happens to transportation in the world of climate change, is that we need to give people options, and we need to be explicit about where are those neighborhoods that don't have these options. I believe that also aligns with questions of equity and stuff like that, but at least on a baseline kind of case, understanding where people do have options, which I'm going to assume are in Cambridge, in Boston, potentially parts of Somerville, maybe parts of Medford. But then, identifying areas where, these options should be extended to and stuff like that.
Yeah, I hear you. So thanks for that. And maybe speaking to AC's, what she brought up, a lot of times it can be hard to even get people to think about doing like for instance a bus route to a certain place if there aren't riders on a similar route. Or let me rephrase that, given the situation, it can be hard to say expand service on a given route if people aren't using it a lot. And but it becomes like a self-fulfilling situation. If you don't give more service, then more people won't use it. But if you give more service, then you at least create the possibility for them to use it. And if they start using it, then it creates the need for more of that kind of service. And I say that because I was about to say to you, Anna Christina, that that's more of a land use issue. That you have these businesses in different places. But where the businesses go will depend on what kind of transportation there is. And the type of businesses that will go there will also depend on the kind of transportation that you have. If you don't have good transit out to various areas, then you'll probably get businesses that don't rely on workers that need to take or want to take transit. So I hear your point, and that's a good point. And so, take John.
Yeah, to Andy's point, to a larger degree, in terms of classification of, let's say, the LMA and Kendall Square, et cetera, they are, again, the travel patterns are more reflective, and mode shares are more reflective of a business district because there's more business and because it has become more densely populated, that people are able to bike or walk to work where they work than they would be in the regular, than is reflected in the whole central area. So it's really clouding over, or let's say diluting, with the current definition, it's diluting the real patterns of movement and the reasons for those movements by having them in that whole central area. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
No, you are making your point, and I appreciate the emphasis on it, because as you could tell earlier on, it took me a little while to fully understand what you were saying. I get it, and I appreciate you. I appreciate that input, and so I'm just going to point out one thing that I had saw that was curious to me, and I also want to appreciate the committee's indulging me on this, because I'm really enjoying rereading the needs assessment. There's just so much, I think, interesting material there, and even if you don't really agree with the way it was done, it's still nonetheless, really good, informative material there. And one thing that I saw that was this piqued my curiosity. Let me scroll down. So it was on page 417. It was on the table 4.2 on fatalities and serious injuries of younger versus older drivers in Boston region versus the state. And let me see, can I get to that table really fast? Let's see if I can. Sorry for a little bit of a delay here. 417. Yeah, okay, so the younger drivers, the percentage of Massachusetts fatalities was 11%. In the Boston region, it was also 11%. So we matched there. But in terms of injuries, for the state, it was 3%, and for the Boston region, it was 14%. So the Boston region has a high percentage, of much higher percentage of injuries. These are car crashes, from young drivers. Now, when we do older drivers, in Massachusetts, it's 20%, and in the Boston region, it's 4%. And for serious injuries, for fatalities, it's 20% and 4% in the Boston region. And for serious injuries, it's 16% in Massachusetts and 19% in the Boston region. So those are kind of equal for the serious injuries, but for fatalities, you have a much higher percentage of older drivers that are having fatalities in the state versus the Boston region. So I found those differences interesting. There wasn't a explanation for it, that I read, but just kind of point that out as an interesting set of statistics. And later on, I saw that when it came to some suggestions that were made, and one was enforcement of driving while inebriated, trying to prevent that more, but that was not something that was considered something that the MPO could do. So for what it is, that's that. I have a lot of other notes, but maybe I'll condense them all at some point. But for now, we're going to shift gears because I see that Cape Victor is here, and ask her to talk with us about shared streets and maybe give us a little introduction as to what she does for MassDOT. So Kate?
I would be happy to. Thank you so much, Len, and thank you, everybody. I am always happy when I get an invitation from Len to come speak to this group. And I am really pleased to be with you for the beginning of the year, and I see some familiar faces. Great to see you guys, even if we're not in person. So yes, I'm an assistant secretary here at MassDOT, and I have had the privilege since June of managing our Shared Streets program. And if we were in person, I would ask people to raise their hands if they have either heard of it or if they've seen Shared Streets type projects in their communities. Yay, thank you, thank you, thank you. But since I'm not, I will do just kind of a quick overview of what we have been doing on these issues here. And actually, am I able to share my screen? It looks like I might be able to. No, I'm not.
All right, give me just one moment and you will be able to. You should be good to go now.
Okay. This will stop another. Yes, I want to stop somebody else.
Go right ahead and stop.
Sorry, whoever I'm stopping. Okay. Can you guys see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is a presentation I put together just to kind of give a basic overview of the program. I see at least Laura and maybe some other folks who were at the MAPC event yesterday. So I apologize if you're having to watch me give this again. But maybe we will get slightly different questions, and so it can go in a slightly different direction. Just very quickly on background, when the world sort of shut down in March and we were all sort of beginning, we didn't realize it was the beginning, but beginning to grasp kind of what the COVID era was going to mean for us. We here at MassDOT were really struggling to figure out how we could do something that would be helpful and useful in the suddenly altered world. And one of the things that we were looking at were examples from elsewhere in the world, particularly in Europe, but also some other examples from North America, of places that were taking advantage of the sudden sort of vanishment of vehicular traffic and the sudden need for people to be outside, to have more space sort of between them as they were walking, people just wanting to get outside. And then as time went on, what became clear was a need for restaurants and stores to be able to work outside as well. So it took a little bit, but at some point we realized that the best approach for us, given how much municipalities dominate ownership of our roads and streets, was to provide money to our municipal partners through the form of a grant program, which is what we did. And we created the Shared Streets and Spaces grant program, which is now in its second phase, which I call the winter phase. We had the summer phase from June through September. And let me just kind of run you through what we have done. This more or less explains what I just said, although probably more articulately. But basically, we sort of see this program as doing two big things. The first is helping municipalities to respond to and ultimately recover from COVID. Again, which means a lot of emphasis on the needs of small businesses, particularly in downtowns and village centers, but also needs for outdoor recreation, safe recreation. And the other big sort of pillar of the program is to provide support for local mobility needs that were either already there, that just hadn't found a funding source, or that were kind of either created or realized through the COVID experience. And since we started in June, we have invested $15 million in 151 projects, and I believe it's in 117 different municipalities. And I will note we started with $5 million and now have a budget of 20, which I think is indication of how successful the program has been. And I'm sure we could spend more than that because we get a lot more applications than we have funding for, which is, although I wish we could fund everyone, is heartening to know how much enthusiasm there is for this concept. So some of this I have touched on. This is sort of the basic details of the program. One of the things that we have done is try to keep the program really simple, both for us to administer and for municipalities to apply for, because we want to be able to deliver money as quickly as possible. And we want to be able to deliver it with as few, I don't want to say strings attached, but we really want to empower communities, given that the grants are small and they're intended to be quick build, quick launch. We want to empower municipalities to make their own decisions about what they think is best, and also to sort of handle and manage local processes as need be. We've now expanded the program so public transit authorities are also eligible applicants. So if you work with any of your RTAs, please encourage them to apply for funding. Grants go as small as 5,000. We've never given away 5,000, but I think we might have given away a 7,000, and as high as 500,000, which is actually an increase from the summer. The summer program, the ceiling was 300,000, but we found that some projects, particularly bus lane projects, needs a little bit more. And we have particular, I don't want to say preference, but particular emphasis on projects that provide safety, better access, better mobility for school children, for youth, for elders, to open space and parks, to public transit, in designated environmental justice communities, and also in communities that are designated as high risk or COVID-19 red, which unfortunately meant more when we started this. Now it seems like it's almost the entire Commonwealth. But we do still try to focus on communities that have been in the high risk category really since the beginning. Most, I think all but one of those we have funded, and we want to continue to try to help them as we can. One also really key part of this program is the technical assistance that's available through the generosity of the Barr Foundation and with support from the Solomon Foundation. There's a team of design and planning consultants, transportation consultants who are available to any municipality that wants help thinking about projects, helps preparing applications, help refining an application, maybe one that wasn't approved. And that has been, for me, that has been a game changer, both in kind of increasing the access to this program from all 351 municipalities, getting us probably better, safer, more thoughtful projects, and just getting a form of technical assistance that might not always be available, particularly to some of our smaller cities and towns. So we have a wide range of types of things that are eligible, but they all basically fall into the category of what we call reimagining streets, which really means reimagining streets, sidewalks, curbs, parking areas, trails, any kind of transportation infrastructure that can be used in any of the ways that sort of COVID has called upon us to use them. Again, whether it's for dining or stores or different kinds of walking and recreation, civic gatherings, we really tried to push the envelope on what we usually use transportation funding for, to make this money as useful as possible for municipalities and to meet the goals, the big goals of the program. Two things, the two bottom categories, shared mobility essentially means that we pay for the capital costs of new hubway or other bike share systems, docks, stations. That was true in the summer, but we didn't get many applications, so we're trying to kind of emphasize it more this time. And investments in the future, which is a new category, is to provide funding for municipalities who piloted or did temporary programs, projects in the summer who now want to make them permanent. We really love to see that. So I mentioned this briefly, but we have funded 151 projects, which I think is pretty amazing. 117 different municipalities, of which 63% are environmental justice communities. We're really proud of that. As well as the MBTA, the Brockton RTA, and DCR. And we're always looking to increase this list. So please encourage your municipalities to apply. And I'll just run through this very quickly, but these are, these are not exemplar projects, but these are sort of representative type projects from the different project categories that we have. The main point I wanted to make here is just that we have projects all over the Commonwealth. There's a greater dispersal than we usually see, which is something we've really worked for and been really happy to have work out. We've got what we now call Main Streets, which in the summer we called outdoor dining, but essentially it's the, eating, drinking, shopping, gathering safely outdoors, using streets and sidewalks and plazas in ways that people might not have done before. Second type, everything you can imagine with streets to make them safer for cyclists, pedestrians, children, older folks, transit users, connections to trails, parks. You see a lot of flex posts, you see a lot of new flashing beacons for pedestrians, crosswalks, ADA ramps, new sidewalk, new separated bike facilities, permanent and temporary, new trailheads, all kinds of things, and all over. From places as big and dense as Chelsea to as small and low density as Dighton. I think that's part of what's sort of the real strength of this program, is that there's something in it that almost every municipality can take advantage of. Better buses. Again, this is maybe not something that everybody can take advantage of, but for places that have a lot of bus transportation, particularly places where buses historically pre-COVID struggle in vehicular congestion, we really are interested in supporting more designated bus lanes, but also bus shelters, signage, transit signal priority. This is leveraging our existing initiative around bus lanes and just trying to get another way to help municipalities support these ideas. And it was slow to start, but we've since actually developed a whole bunch of projects with the MBTA and also with Brockton. Shared mobility, I mentioned bike share. Again, I forgot to put in the Newton projects here, but we're hoping to see more of these this time around. And last but not least, if anybody hasn't looked at it, this is the information for our program website. You can also contact us through that, as well as through the Shared Streets email box, which is monitored every day, and we get back to people really quickly. So please, I'll stop sharing, but I'm happy either to answer any questions now or separately. And I just really, really encourage you to work with your municipalities and other municipalities to encourage applications. And that's it.
Great, thank you, Kate. I certainly have a couple of questions, but I want to ask members of the committee first. John?
If I had my hand up, it was for the previous
Okay, all right,
section, but actually, as long as I'm on, Kate, fabulous initiative.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really been great.
Very timely, very targeted, and just much needed. It showed a lot of commitment by Governor Baker.
Thank you. It has, as I always say, it has been a bright spot in a really, really challenging time, and we're proud to have done it.
So, David?
Hi, thanks. Thanks for a great presentation. I had a question. In the recent weeks leading up to the year end, we had the sort of threat of significant cuts at the in the MassDOT, and one of the things that we were asked as that our own town identified as a priority for us under threatened cuts was we think that our transportation system could really benefit from having flexibility between modes, more flexibility than it currently has. We are served both in Needham by a commuter rail, and we have a very limited bus service. Bus is by definition probably a lot cheaper to run than running the commuter rail. And so as the proposal was to cut back on commuter rail, our point was, can you develop, we urge you, please, MassDOT, can you develop the ability to substitute when this kind of thing has to happen, a cheaper mode rather than just cut it entirely. And so I know that's not necessarily what this program was designed for, but your title of policy coordination made me wonder, is there any room for that kind of a discussion, or adding that into the mix?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can speak generally. I think that the work that was done to come up first with the proposal and then with an ultimate kind of slate of service reductions at the MBTA was both done very quickly and done very rigorously and thoughtfully based on a lot of data around usage and ridership and how things are shifting with COVID. So this isn't specifically speaking to Needham, but I guess just in general, I would ask the question of sort of who is using a mode that maybe is being a mode or a service that's maybe being reduced. Would an alternative mode serve whatever their needs happen to be effectively? Are there enough people using it to warrant that? And then what could it look like? I do know in general that when we're doing maintenance or construction and we need to replace, do interim replacements of rail service with buses, it often works very poorly, because the great thing about rail, right, is it just cuts right through and there's nothing in its way. And if you ever had the misfortune of taking any of the D-line bus shuttling between, Brookline and Kenmore, it's a nightmare. So it is not necessarily as easy as substituting one mode for another, but it is a good point that when we look to cut service, even if we're doing it for financial reasons, is there some less expensive alternative that just doesn't take it away altogether? Which is, it's an interesting question. I don't know that we tend to think in those terms, so it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, we're not trying to recreate the entire commuter rail system by bus, but the bus line that we have does connect us to the Green Line, and therefore allows us to get back. If you don't have Saturday service, you don't have Sunday service, but you do have the bus, you can therefore connect to the network. And I guess I'm hesitant to accept the notion that we have to look at it simply from the perspective of do the total numbers justify the service, because there are for some people for whom they have no option, they have no other alternative. Now, granted, if it's only 2 people a day, that would be unacceptable. But we have to look at it not just in comparing total numbers of ridership, but how are we going to get people both from Needham or from the burbs into the higher density areas, and how are we going to get the workers, the various people who are coming out from there during the day to our place. So there's real need there, even when the numbers don't necessarily suggest we're going to run a full bus. Still, we gotta have our medical personnel showing up at the hospital, and it's crucial regardless of numbers. Thanks. I just wanted to share that. I'm always looking for opportunities to figure out how can we encourage that kind of cross coordination. We have a development going on in Newton, the corridor project there, and it's going to have impact on all of the flow of traffic through that area, including that same bus. And various attempts on my part to find out, has there been any ability to talk the people running the bus service versus the people who are going to do the construction? Have they talked to each other? And the best I've been able to get so far is, oh, we're going to look into that and get back to you. And that was many weeks ago, and nobody's gotten back. So it's an ongoing area where we don't have the kind of left side talking to the right side that I think would be ideal. So thanks.
I hear you. Sure.
Thanks, David. Could you share your presentation again briefly?
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, maybe it's like 3.
Don't hesitate to interrupt my screen sharing.
3
sorry
slides.
to do that. Okay.
It might have been 3 slides from the end, and it was types of programs.
This guy?
so maybe a little further ahead, you know.
The project types.
So next one. Yeah, so this one kind of number two. I mean, it kind of reminded me of the community connections, part of the the MPO's budget. And,
Absolutely.
and so how many grants did you fund for those kinds of projects?
For bus projects?
No. The number two. I mean, so the community connections one is the one that I was talking about. Kind of reminded me of I'm sorry. Yeah, Reimagine Streets. I mean, is kind of what reminded me a bit about the community connections. I know it doesn't maybe seem as obvious or as intuitive as the Better Buses, but I mean, part of that is just kind of making it easier for people, to get from place to place, and sometimes that's to a node on the transit network. But one of the issues. So first off, I want to ask, so about how many grants did you give for these kind of projects?
For streets, I actually don't know off the top of my head. I know it was the biggest grouping of project types, in large part because it kind of encompasses lots of different things.
Right.
And I know I've been sort of watching the Community Connections program. There are a bunch of grant programs around state government that sort of, in one way or another, speak to some of these issues, and I try to keep my eye on all of them as best I can. And they do best when they work together.
Right. Because I mean, one of the things that Sandy pointed out to us when he talked to us about the first year of the Community Connections is that there was this overhead issue. That I think to a certain extent, a lot of the members of the MPO board weren't anticipating, that made implementing the programs difficult, or challenging, more challenging than expected. And so I was wondering to what extent you encountered that when deploying these kind of programs, and to the extent you did encounter that, what did you do in order to work through that?
Well, so I think, so by and large, not just with this program, but we know in general that municipalities often struggle with project implementation, particularly complex projects, and Lord knows we struggle with it too. And that was one of our concerns going into this program, whether the kind of quick build, quick launch idea was really going to be possible. But what we found was actually it really was. And part of what made that true was that in a lot of cases, the projects were either temporary or they were making use of, as you see in this picture, like pretty simple temporary materials. And I think that helped. One of the big delays for a lot of places was just receiving materials they ordered. There was a big run on things like jersey barriers and tables and chairs and stuff. And we are still tracking some projects that haven't completed yet, even though they were supposed to have a couple months ago. But I was very pleasantly surprised at how many were able to get a lot of what they proposed done in a pretty short amount of time as these things go.
Right.
And where we needed to, we helped them troubleshoot, but we really did kind of leave it up to them to get it all done.
Right. So then, all right, because as I said, the issue that Sandy pointed out to us was the overhead part, and that wasn't, I guess, really spelled out in detail as to what the overhead issues were. But all right, well, thanks. And I don't think I see another hand up. So I'll ask another quick question, and perhaps Andy Rieger can join in on this one. I was walking past Dover Street, I think, and Mass Ave in Cambridge, and saw a parklet, there, and a bus happened to be going by at the time, and there's a bike lane there, and I was thinking, parklets, bike lanes, and buses, sometimes they come together in a way that can be a little challenging. I think now in Arlington, where we did parklets, the roadway is such that you can still keep the bike lane there, but this one was kind of forcing the bus, kind of out a bit, and then took out the bike lane. So So this isn't a criticism. I'm just kind of wondering, what are the decisions that go into deciding, to do that kind of implementation?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the core challenge of all this stuff, right? Like right of way is only so wide, and there are lots and lots of uses and more that are trying to kind of squeeze themselves into it. And I think part of the unstated philosophy behind this whole idea is that you can push back on the vehicular uses, that there's extra capacity, or in some places other ways for people to get around. Two things that we did set as sort of like unbreakable rules for shared streets projects that we funded where they couldn't detour or interrupt bus service. Bus service had to remain the way it was, and they couldn't truncate or take over bike lanes. We got a couple of projects where people wanted to put tables and chairs and restaurants on bike lanes, and we said no, can't do that. Got to figure out a way around it. And I saw examples from all over the state of places that handled these things differently, but by and large, I would say most of them used parking lanes. Proving a point that I've always believed, which is that there's probably more on-street parking in a lot of places than is really needed. And so I'm extremely curious now to see what happens and whether municipalities, ultimately decide to take those spaces back for parking. I think particularly the outdoor dining restaurant stuff seemed to be really, really popular. So I think and hope that there will be a lot of public expectation that they will continue to be outdoors. But yeah, I mean, there's only so much space, and it can be really hard to squeeze everything in. And one of our concerns was that if you were putting people out having dinner in the middle of a travel lane, you had to have crash-worthy barriers around them. And I know the one you're talking about on Dover Street, it does kind of hang out there into the road.
All right, great, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other hands.
My hand.
Okay, Franny.
I just wanted to ask, what's the timing on these winter applications?
So we are accepting grants through the end of March, I believe. So February or March. There are at least 2 more months when you can submit. So there's time, and we really encourage municipalities to do so.
Right. So any other hands? I mean, maybe you can see the grid view, Matt. I can't. I can only see the participants list. You see any other hands?
From my perspective, I am not seeing any physical hands. As a reminder, folks, if you're having difficulty raising your digital hand, it's located, if you have the newest version of Zoom, it's located at the bottom of your screen. There should be a button there that says raise hand. Alternately, you can click on the participants button, and there should be a raise hand button in there.
Okay.
For me, it's now within reactions.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they changed it. It's in reactions. So
Stop changing that.
Queen's hand was up.
yeah. So John?
Yeah, I'm assuming that since this is pretty much COVID driven, that as we get more people vaccinated, that this program's going to perhaps end at the end of 2021, maybe?
At this point, we don't know. I mean, I'm curious as well. I think there is, to some extent, it has developed a momentum of its own, separate from COVID. But at the same time, it was, its creation was in response to COVID, and the Commonwealth obviously has lots of other needs. So we'll wait and see kind of what happens.
So I think maybe I'll ask one more question. It'll probably be it'll be the next to last one, because I see Franny has her hand back up, and that's good, Franny. So one of the best things I thought that happened in 2018 was the report on the future transportation piece. I don't want to let that go. I know that COVID's kind of like thrown in everything askew a bit, but I just wanted to find out if you have any updates or thoughts about how that is staying in the forefront, or where it is. If it's not in the forefront, what can we do to get it back out there? Because I definitely have some ideas about which scenario we should aim towards.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's actually funny. I had a call last week from the Kansas DOT that was looking to learn about the scenario planning work that we had done. Yeah, I mean, it's funny actually, when COVID first sort of started, and we were all, trying to get a grasp on what was going on and what might go on, there was a lot of discussion among my colleagues about that work. And did this suddenly point us to what was known as the multi-hub scenario, which was, not a dense Boston core so much maybe, but people more sort of spread out with less of a hub and spoke system. And we're actually looking to do, we have done, and we are looking to do additional scenario work, particularly around COVID. So I think the ideas, the specific ideas, but almost more importantly, sort of the concepts behind the ideas, the methodologies behind the ideas are very much things that we still use. And I guess the challenging thing for me is the commission report was so grounded in the idea of public transit. And I pray that people will come back to it in different forms, so that can continue to be true for the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I mean, because the multi-hub was definitely the scenario that I thought was the best one, because I mean, it also takes out that kind of roulette or whatever. I mean, or lottery. I mean, like where you're born is what determines your destiny. I mean, and so I think we had that, and that could make it easier for people to walk and bike. I mean, to the area. So so okay. I'm glad that that's still there. I'll be back to talk about that more at some point in some other venue, perhaps. So with that, we'll take Franny's question. That'll be the last one, and then we'll talk with Tegan.
I think I don't need, I realized, can you just tell us your email? Because I think that it's more specific to our area, and I can just ask Kate separately.
Sure. Actually, Matt has my email address. That's probably the best way.
Yeah, I can email that to you, Franny.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Kate.
Well,
but thank you guys so much. I don't want to steal the stage from Tegan, but it's good to see you too. Yeah. And I look forward to doing this again, hopefully in person before too long.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
And everybody stay healthy, please.
Yeah. Thanks for being so gracious and visiting us again. It's always
all right. Always fun.
Care.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
So next we're gonna have Tegan. Welcome back, Tegan. Even though I see you at MPO meetings, it's nothing like having you back with us. You know, so
it's like being back, but it's also not like being back, because this is a strange to be joining virtually.
Right. I hear you. Yeah. So take it away.
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. It's really good to see a few of your faces and then see a lot of your names. But it's nice to come back. And Len, from our brief sort of exchange, I really didn't come prepared with anything sort of terribly formal to say. I thought I could give a little bit of an update on what a few of the current priorities are that are in my mind for CTPS and the Boston Region MPO. And then the other thing that I brought with me is maximum sort of a 10-minute summary of some slides I've been using to talk about the MPO to stakeholders and about what it does and what its importance is, that I think is a little more engaging than we've done in the past. And so that's what I sort of brought to this conversation. And just what I wanted to check with you, Len, on is what would you prefer, how would you prefer me to engage with you all at this time?
Well, as I said in my response, let's start off and see if the members just have any general questions or issues that they want to raise with you, and if that peters out, or doesn't gain any momentum, then we can go into some of the things you just suggested.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, I would welcome questions. As you all may know, I've been now Executive Director of CTPS, the Boston Region MPO staff, for a little over a year. So I'm sure I have far more perspective now than I did the last time I saw you. But it is amazing how time flies, but 10 of those months have been in the pandemic. And so certainly the majority of my time as a leader of this organization has been working from home. So I would love to hear from you what your questions might be. And if not, I can talk on my own as well. I'm always good at that.
Well, I think we're seeing a dearth of hands go up because you're just doing a great job. And I certainly think you are. You handled the shift in the way we had to interact, very well. And also, it's nice to, at least from my perspective, it's nice to know the executive director. And know that you come to the position from our perspective, and understands how the challenges of having an organization like the council on the board. And so thanks. And I will just, I'm sure when you talk to us about other things, some questions will come up, and I can certainly ask some questions that are on mine. So let's just talk about the MPO.
Yeah, so why don't I first just tell you from my perspective some of the priorities that I'm currently engaged in. And I do want to mention that we finally did bring on our deputy executive director. I took a little time before recruiting that position because I wanted to really sort of work with the leadership that existed before sort of adding more, kind of adding to the leadership team. And if people aren't familiar, it was that the executive director and the deputy executive director of CTPS left right around the same time. So I took over, and we recently did recruit Gina Peril, who comes to us with an extensive background in strategy and in communications, which I think is an incredibly healthy thing for CTPS as staff to the MPO right now. So a lot of my thinking and priorities right now are around how best to use her in that new capacity that we have to think strategically about how we as staff support the MPO. So I hope that Gina will come and introduce herself to you all in not too long from now, but she's still getting her feet under her. She's only been with us for a few weeks at this point. But that said, I wanted to highlight that at some point during the pandemic, I think closer to last summer, we started engaging in a strategic plan for CTPS. And I think I had a chance to talk about that as we were right before we were getting started, I think. And we still haven't wrapped it up yet, but there are definitely themes that are emerging from it that I think will inform how we look at our organization over the coming 5 years that don't surprise me and that I would like to mention because they're sort of a central part of my priorities at the moment. And on top of that, there will be things coming out of our strategic plan that will really become relevant for the board. There'll be things that really aren't within CTPS as an organization's control. They're really an MPO board topic that we can support and engage in, but that it requires board decision-making. And Len has been involved in the Strategic Planning Steering Committee and is also, of course, as a member of the board, going to be engaged in those conversations. So I wanted to highlight that we are hoping to wrap up that process in a few months, and then we'll be engaging the board in their operations plan as well. But certainly some of the things I'm thinking a lot about are that strategic planning process and how we're going to implement it. No surprise, even though I think we will be working from home for a while yet, I have certainly some sense of caution about my optimism about the distribution of the vaccine. But we are thinking about kind of what our work from home policy should be as we return to the office and how we will hopefully work with our partners to continue forms of virtual engagement. So those things are all percolating around, I think, in everybody's minds, but I just want to reassure you that we are also thinking about those topics. Internally facing, another thing that we have realized we need to do is that we have a lot of really great technical people, but we have a little work to do to sort of enhance how we're supporting people who are essentially managing projects, and also how we can retain and then recruit new talent in a way that really embraces innovation and growth and supporting evolving needs of the board. So we're having a lot of conversation on how we support staff professional development and how we actually create a better space for innovation amongst MPO staff. Another topic that I hopefully is no surprise to you is a priority for me is how we boost our communications and outreach capacity so that we can reach a broader audience, in particular with an even stronger commitment as we move forward related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So these are all very central themes in our strategic planning process. A big initiative, which is a whole separate conversation, but I do want to mention for you all, is that we are engaging in what I think we are now calling our model roadmap, or our modeling tool roadmap, which is, I knew when I started that we have this very powerful and complicated tool, or what's actually tools, which are regional travel demand models, and how they're used. They're used extensively, both for the MPO and the long range planning, but also in our work with non-MPO funded work, like for example, how we're supporting the ALST 990 process. And there are a couple of challenges I saw around our role in using these tools. One being that there was definitely some concern over a lack of sort of transparency as to how these tools work. They're incredibly complicated, very difficult to communicate, and we were not necessarily doing a great job communicating them. But also, I think that it takes a really serious investment to at some point take a step back and ask ourselves, are the tools in the, are our tools in the right place to be able to serve the evolving needs of the MPO? And in particular in a pandemic where reliable data, trends, those sorts of things are all sort of going out the window. So how do we evolve our tools to work better in terms of planning and uncertainty and thinking more about sensitivity and how we affect decisions, rather than tools that sort of try to convince people or that people think are trying to literally predict sort of an outcome in the future. So we have a group of our staff that are now focused on the strategic evolution of our modeling tools. And we've committed a significant amount of resource to sort of investing in that rethink. And that's it's a painful process to do, but it is ongoing. I also want to emphasize that we've been doing a lot of work. Our coordination with MAPC, I think, has been improving, and we're partnering more on projects where we're supporting different municipalities or sub-regional areas in the region. And I think it's a really strong partnership. We bring a bit more of the technical expertise, and they bring a bit more of the sort of broader policy and land use and zoning considerations. So we're able to do sort of a more comprehensive planning process, I think, when we combine forces and work together. So I think those are just a few things. I made a few notes over here, sorry, that I wanted to make sure you knew that we were working on, so I didn't just come to you in a vacuum and you think things are status quo, or just to give you a sense and maybe some fodder to ask questions about. And then, like I said, I could spend, just kind of 10 minutes walking through a few slides about how I'm communicating to folks about the MPO going forward. And this is a continually evolving thing, but I'm trying to make the MPO more sort of present and apparent to people in the region and help them identify more with the value of the MPO. But I can pause first to see if anybody wants to ask any questions about any of the initiatives I just highlighted, or I can jump right into those slides if you like.
Well, we pause and take some questions, and you can be on this, and can they maybe branch out a little bit, Tegan, even if it's not on this particularly?
Of course,
Great.
absolutely.
Right. So AC?
Oh, I wanted to mention a point earlier, but I think maybe I'll wait till you're done with the slides, see if it comes up first. And then I had something really quick to bring up.
Right.
But I'll wait.
Okay, no problem, thanks. And so, yeah, I didn't know how much you need to really ask about what's going on with the strategic plan. And so I'm going to bring up something, and if it's not the right place to talk about it, and then just say as much. But it actually came up in yesterday's meeting when we were talking about the mission statement, and I had actually asked me why it was that the 3 C's weren't mentioned. And I guess a bit of my concern is that if we are going to have one statement for the MPO, because the tension or the question is whether we have 2 statements, one for CTPS, and one for the MPO. And I think, the group is kind of leaning towards having one statement. I just think, if someone were to ask us that question, especially given the big role that the certification team plays, why isn't the 3 C's in there? How would we answer that?
So I think the answer is that the 3 C's are in there. The 3C terminology is something that it's difficult for any average member of the public to sort of make into something concrete, right? We talk about how we engage and the processes that we engage in without necessarily continuing to use the 3C approach or the 3C specific language. But we typically say things like collaborative, comprehensive. We don't say continuing per se, we say sort of ongoing. So it's intended to be incorporated without sort of fixating on the language that the feds, have kind of used to capture the process. And if that doesn't end up being, satisfactory for us internally and with the board, I don't think that that's a problem either way. I think the intent was to make the mission as a sort of approachable and understandable outside of the framework of knowing the processes already as possible. But I don't disagree with any of the 3 C's as they stand. And as you'll see when I talk about the way we're talking about the MPO, we still highlight the core documents that we are working on that you all provide input into and provide commentary on the long range plan, the TIP, and the UPWP. But we're exploring ways to try to make it sound just more approachable, I suppose.
All right, that's fine. Yeah, because I was going to suggest, and I mean, just look at them more closely to see if the 3 Cs were incorporated into the language, because that is the solution to that. And so I see where you're coming from, and as you can tell in those meetings, I mean, I try to hold back, so if I'll ask a question and then kind of like just take the answer and not pursue it, because that I feel isn't the venue for it, and you can end up taking a whole lot of time doing that. So this was an opportunity to ask you about that. So thank you. And
Absolutely.
so we'll have David and.
Thanks. Hi, thank you, Tegan, for joining us. Good to see you again. I had just one comment. You know, I don't know, I've been at this for a number of years now. I am no professional. I'm reminded of that every meeting. But you know, it took me many years and only recently dawned on me how well in terms of a given project, there is an integration with what the MassDOT does and what the MPO does in terms of early on considering of projects, and it sort of is funneled at once and then becomes you know, may be allocated, some piece of the financing may head in the direction of the MPO, but it took me too long to realize that that was integrated. And I just would throw that out for consideration. If you're trying to explain to the public, it might be worth, if I've got it right finally now, trying to sort of explain that to the general public too, that when municipalities come forward with proposed projects, there is kind of an automation of how that project is considered and then divvied up, considerations given to how to pay for it. But I had kind of naively believed that there was one silo that was MassDOT, and there was another silo that was MPO funded projects. And sometimes then they got reintegrated after they'd been separately considered, which struck me as ridiculous, but that's how it felt, is how it worked. So I just share that for consideration as part of the messaging.
Well, thank you, David. That is a fantastic comment. And one of the things we've been working on together actually is improving how we onboard and provide kind of support and education for board members. And so we've created a new version of what we're calling a 101, where actually a lot of staff people participate in talking about the different things they do. And this is related to what you're saying, because Matt Genova, who's here, as I've gone through that process, multiple times there have been this feedback. Can we get to the point where you actually talk about and walk a project through the whole process and how it gets to the tip? And through that sort of communicate to people what those connections are and those sort of interdependencies are and how they work together. Because you're right, it's all very related. It's also all very confusing. And so we need to come up with a better way to try to simplify that down for folks to understand at least the relationship and the process a little bit better. So I think that's an excellent point. And I know Matt's here and can hopefully hear that. And I'm not sure if we've gotten very far with that yet, but I think that it's a place we still need to work on getting to.
Yeah,
I
actually wished I had mentioned to the members of the committee that you were having that 101, because I think you would have made it open to members of the committee. So I will make sure, whether I am in this position or not, to make it clear that when you do these again next year, that they are open, to committee members. And along the lines of what David just said, because when I was reading chapter 4 in the needs assessment, it became clear to me how the HSIP program can often grab a lot of projects that are related to safety issues. So if there are places where there are a lot of injuries or death, then if a project comes along that can solve that problem, then there's funding, federal funding through the HSIP program, and so that, it wouldn't necessarily then have to be funded by the MPO. So that just feeds into what David said, and it's an insight that I got the last couple of days in reading the needs assessment again. So with that and no hands up, we'll let you give your little 10-minute presentation and a few more questions after that, maybe.
Sure. What I will say is, while the next couple months are going to be the very, very, very busy season for certification activity staff, I don't think you'll probably won't have to wait another year before there's some additional 101 opportunities. So we'll try to make sure that we actually communicate that to you or directly to the advisory council, because I do think it's a great forum if you can find the time to attend, to just really be able to dig into these things and have really great access to staff in a conversational format. So with that, though, let me see if I can successfully, it's always a challenge. So I think you can see my screen. And I think if I project, you can now see my presentation.
No, not seeing it at the moment, Tegan.
Okay, hang on. Let me go back then. I always struggle with whether I share screen before I present. Hey, oh, here we go. One sec.
All right, got your desktop. There we go.
Yay. All right, success. Only one quick fail. All right. So I'm going to do this 10 minutes in a more conversational format than I might in a forum where, people are less familiar. But the intent was to create a sort of a more graphical and hopefully some kind of easier way to go and talk to people about the MPO and what it does. And so one of the things we start with is, of course, a nice graphic to warm people up. But then we do start with this idea that MPOs are federally mandated organizations, and that as such, they also have federally mandated things that we must do. And that even though part of our federal mandate is to be collaborative and transparent and to engage the public, to do 3 core things. And these are the documents that the advisory council is sort of very explicitly commenting on over the year, in addition to doing all the other things that you do. But then we describe those 3 kind of key components of the MPO work as the long range plan, which is the framework for everything we do, and that being a multimodal transportation plan for the region as a whole. And that's called the LRTP, or the Long Range Transportation Plan, which I hope you're all familiar with at this point. And again, it's a 20-year vision, and it sets goals, and it sets sort of funding goals and funding pockets. It has the needs assessment, but that's our sort of big, broad scale framework. We also then translate that into how the MPO wants to distribute the federal funds at its discretion to infrastructure projects in a 5-year rolling transportation improvement program. So that's the capital sort of translation in the nearer term of what we outline as a framework within the long range plan. And then in addition, the MPO is charged with carrying out multimodal transportation planning to support its goals and doing it at a regional scale. And that is documented and sort of defined in the Unified Planning Work Program, or the UPWP. And that sort of also lays out, sort of how we're applying our funding in that sense. So we talk about the 3 core things that the MPO does. And there are actually other slides that if I was going to go longer, that would talk about our equity program, our performance-based planning, but for the purposes of this short talk, it didn't make sense to include those, but just so you know, they're there. So then we sort of shift over to sort of what's an MPO, and the Boston MPO is one of 13 such entities or similar entities in the entire state. And so it typically is nice to see a little bit of the graphics, but then it kind of break it out in terms of funding. So the state gets roughly $600 million of federal highway funding annually for constructing multimodal transportation projects, right? And then after they take debt out of that amount, the state allocates about 40% of that funding to all of the MPOs. So that's roughly $250 million of construction. They also allocate planning funds, planning money to guide those studies and our work to create those documents, et cetera. And so that's 14 million that's also spread out amongst the state. So once it's divided, the Boston region actually gets the bulk of that funding. And so our proportion of the 250 and the 14 is about 43%. And the other regions get, significantly smaller percentages of the funding pool. And that's because the Boston region, while it only has about 1/3 of the road lane miles, it also has half of the jobs and population in the state. And that allocation is not just about basic infrastructure, it's actually about the people and the jobs, the economic opportunity. And that's why the Boston Region MPO gets the bulk of the funding. So it's also kind of important to note here that in our region, or in our state, the state provides the matching funds, the 20% local match. And as such, we have a somewhat unique organization in the country where we still have, this is the Boston Region MPO and all of its cities and towns, we still have the state chairing all of the MPOs in our state. And we are the last state to function that way. But again, they provide the local match. And so that's a huge kind of dollar amount benefit that they bring to doing this regional planning and construction work. So our MPO, and all MPOs are different. Our Boston Region MPO, their structure, our structure, has a number of state seats. That's DOT, which is also the chair, multiple seats for DOT, MBTA, and this is more the capital side of MBTA, sits on the board, and then Massport, Massachusetts Port Authority. But in addition to that, we have the 12 elected seats for municipalities. There are 4 at large, which again, I keep forgetting, I need to update this, this graphic. It's actually incorrect. Brookline is now on the board, I believe, instead of Lexington. But we have 4 at large cities and towns. And then we have representatives from each of the sub-regions defined by MAPC's sort of structure. So those are the 12 elected seats. And then there are 2 permanent seats for the city of Boston. And then, of course, where you all come in, there are multiple seats for sort of advisory councils or advisory groups. We always talk about the advisory council as being kind of the nexus where a broad representation is brought together for the advisory council, and then that you as a group get a seat on the board to vote. The MBTA advisory board is another important advisory piece of this. And then of course, MAPC has a seat on the board, and they are also the vice chair of the MPO. So we try to convince people that you should care about MPOs because we're working on addressing transportation challenges and improving access to opportunities. We look at congestion and all the associated impacts. We're working to ensure that everybody can benefit from our transportation system, regardless of age, gender, race, income, ability, or language. And of course, we are trying to work together to bring transportation and land use and other considerations together to create a better transportation system that maximizes economic vitality and quality of life in our region. So if I can take less than 5 minutes, this has been a really fun story that we have been telling. And this kind of comes out of a really excellent timeline that I think Sandy Johnston with other staff, but primarily sort of put together to sort of tell the story about why MPOs came to be. And if you don't know this history, this is a very simplified version of it, but it is really informative as to why the MPO does what it does. And I think it helps ground me in the purpose of the organization amidst all the other stakeholders in the transportation world here. But let's start with a little timeline. And we start back in 1948, even though you could start in different places. But that's when the state of Massachusetts developed its first highway master plan. And it looked somewhat like this. No surprise, this is some of the highway planning that you probably can all recognize from the time. But at this time, the key thing here was that the feds were funding large percentage or most of the road building costs, but planning was happening at the state level. And at that time, the state was really focused on technical considerations and wasn't thinking comprehensively about the social or land use implications of building these major freeways. So that is the style of planning that dominated in the highway era, which led to the kinds of transportation solutions or suggestions, designs that you see here, which is part of the inner belt. And the idea was building massive highway interchanges onto local networks to be able to move people essentially more through regions. And there wasn't as much thought as maybe could have been put towards the thousands of people that the inner belt would have displaced and the walls that it would have put up between communities like Cambridge and Somerville. This is sort of the Union Square area at the top, I think, if I'm oriented correctly. And this is Cambridge Street. So just these massive highway interchanges just kind of plopped right on top of the urban fabric. And you certainly see the results of that in the Southwest Corridor, although thankfully that became a walking and biking facility rather than an actual highway. So moving on, there was controversy, probably no surprise to anyone here around that. And in 1962, with all that controversy going on, the Federal Aid Highway Act mandated that any federal aid projects like the highways talked about in this plan, we're actually going to need to be based on the continuing comprehensive transportation planning carried on cooperatively between states and local communities. So that's sort of where I think the 3C genesis or documentation really occurred. And the point was that it had to be ongoing, it had to be really thorough, and it had to be collaborative with local communities. So at this time, states and urban entities, they started to create ad hoc committees or formalize existing advisory councils. And those were the very first steps towards getting to MPOs. But at that time, there was no real teeth and no real power to those groups existing. They were simply trying to accomplish this sort of more comprehensive and collaborative planning process. So then the highway revolt controversy continued. There was lots and lots of protests from the late 50s through about 1970. And this wasn't just in Boston, this was actually around the country. And it challenged this highway era planning practices. And eventually gathering significant political support, sort of our marker for the tide turning is in November of 1970, Governor Francis Sargent put a moratorium on building highways inside of Route 128. And then he called for a comprehensive multimodal study of the region's transportation needs. So moratorium, comprehensive relook, and it resulted in a dead stop of construction projects like this ghost ramp you see here. You can actually still see today, kind of coming off of our highway system. So he's also sort of credited for saying a lot of things and being willing to admit that the process prior had been wrong. And that he was credited also with talking about how we can't build ourselves out of congestion, which is a real basis for how we operate as an MPO. So then in 1973, MPOs were formally established through the Federal Aid Highway Act of that year. And they were also given the power to authorize the use of all federal transportation funds. So the MPO has that amount I showed you, the $250 million across the state for its selected projects, but it also has to approve the federal funds being used by the state and the T, which they go through their own prioritization project to determine where they want to spend the money, but the MPO has a final sort of yay or nay approval on those federal funds. So I hope, I don't know how much of that was new for folks, and I don't want to go on too long, but I just think that's such a good grounding and why the MPO exists as a regional entity and what it's intended to accomplish. And again, that it's got this grounding in this idea that we can't build outside of congestion. We can't build out of congestion, and there needs to be a multimodal planning process. And as part of that, also that back in I think 73 was when funds also started being able to be flexed to transit as well, highway funds. So I thought that might be where I stopped, just based on the amount of time that we have. I have plenty of other things I can do to make this like long and short, but that's sort of, I think the history is a good thing to see, and also just kind of the basic framing around the purpose of the MPO. So with that, I might stop sharing.
And with that, I'm going to call Anna Christina to the front if she wants. Still talk?
So
I'm here. Earlier on, I'd mentioned I had a call about 2 or 3 weeks ago with Stephen Lynch, and we were discussing the new incoming administration and their gung-ho to go for infrastructure and make sure that it's, you know, resilient and climate ready and whatnot. And I'm an Envision specialist and an auditor right now. And there was some hesitation on his part because he doesn't understand that a lot of stuff can be done right now that doesn't require an overhaul of the existing building code, which is a big deal in our profession. But he wants to put together a forum, and in that forum, I'm going to have some people from Envision, also the Green Building Council, which is also, both of those are global organizations. But it would be nice to highlight certain aspects of how you get accredited for these projects. And, you know, it's like leadership and quality of life, equity, all that you've been discussing. And I'm hoping that you either know of a complete street project that utilized some of this, maybe went for some of these credits, or can put together a list of project ready upcoming projects that are looking to get certified through one of these programs, and we can maybe use them when it comes time to go into hearings And that'll be around July through after. I think they have July till sometime to pass.
Okay, so I'm not totally sure I fully understand.
I'm
but
looking
with-
for projects that either already went for accreditation for a sustainability, resiliency, you know, and I'm sure those projects that we funded in the past through MPO that have gone for these accreditations or are about to. So if I could get a list of which projects meet that.
Okay, so yes, we've been talking a lot about resiliency and incorporating resiliency into more and more of our studies and projects. So I think that we could talk a little bit more offline with probably Matt Genova and with Anne McGann to identify if we can give you some more information on that. So let's follow up, Anna Christina, after this, and we can try to help you get you that information.
That would be awesome. I mean, we still are putting the forum together, so it's going to be a while before we need actual cases, but it would be nice to have a list that can come, like I said.
Great.
So
We'll
that'll
work
be
with you.
great.
So I'll close this out, Tegan, and say that thanks a lot for joining us. And sorry about the background sound. But a while ago you had mentioned the notion of kind of like reimagining transportation, I mean, especially in light of COVID. And I don't know if you caught the last end part of my conversation with Kate Victor, but I think it'd be good to revisit the future of transportation and really, I mean, like take it seriously and think about the future that we really want. And I think maybe this pandemic has shown us some more possibilities. So I will personally get together with you when you have some time, to talk about that. But if you wanted to do it, in a larger setting, I offer you us, as that setting, and maybe we can do something with MPO. Just kind of brainstorming, but I figured I'd do it publicly with you here. And so, but really, thanks for joining us, and it's been a pleasure working with you both here and on the MPO itself, the board.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm always happy to come back if there are specific or general things that you'd like to touch base on. But Len, I love the topic you brought up. And we are grappling with exactly those questions about, rather than reacting, how to be proactive and get to the actual goals that we want to have, the transportation system that we want to have. So I look forward to continuing that conversation.
Well, thank you, everybody. So this wraps up the first meeting of the year. And look forward to the next one. I think our guest is going to be Sandy and maybe Matt at that one. I can't remember, but they'll probably do back for UPWP update and the TIP Universe update. So, all right, take care, guys.